What's up guys, Fi here, and today we're going to be looking at patch 4.11. Now I'm sorry this video is a little bit late. I had to work this week, so I just didn't really have time to do a video. Now because this video is late, I'm going to revamp the format just for this episode. So I'm going to show you on screen the patch notes so you can see and focus more on the analysis side, which I'll bring up on the side of your screen. So with that all said and out of the way, let's jump right in. So the first three changes then are kind of general changes. They're bounty rewards or kill rewards, turrets and experience. Now to sum these up, basically kill rewards now give you more gold early and your bounties take longer to vamp up. Now the reason this is cool is because it's going to reward your aggression earlier. So basically level 1 fights are going to be more rewarding, and so you'll kind of want to take them more, and it's going to make it more exciting in your games and LCS games as well. The other change also encourages aggression as well, because if you think about it, when you're sitting on that bounty, you're not sure if you want to fight just in case you die. But now that it takes a little bit longer to ramp up, you don't really have that doubt in the back of your mind. So you'll be more likely to pick that fight and kind of snowball your lead even more. Now the turret change is kind of harsh. It's basically going to mean that turrets hurt a lot more now, and you can't really dive people early in a 2v1 or just a 1v1 situation. Now this kind of is the opposite of the kill rewards, because they're trying to take away the early aggression, and I guess in some ways they're just making towers safe havens now. So when you're under your turret, you shouldn't be fearing a dive. Now finally, this experience is kind of a good and a bad thing. So the good thing is that you won't be able to freeze your opponent out of lane, and that's a good thing for the guy who's being frozen out. It means that basically your enemy can't punish you as hard if you're losing that lane, and you'll be able to hug your turret, which is now buffed, and you'll be able to stay within EXP range. The bad side is that in a 2v1, or just if you're winning your lane, you can't really punish the laner as hard. In my opinion, if you start losing your lane, then you should be punished for that. Like if you're losing, then you should be losing. You shouldn't just be kind of losing money but still getting experience. So let's jump into the champion changes then, and first up we have Braum. So apart from Braum being OP because he has that massive tash, he's also just really strong in lane and kind of in the mid game as well. So Riot are trying to adjust where he's strong. They're going to take his passive and they're going to knock it down a notch so the damage is less earlier into the game, and also you don't have as long to proc the stun. Now this is pretty good because in my opinion Braum's kit is very strong. The kind of the natural stun and the knock up on his ultimate plus the shield and the dash with the armor and magic resist mean that it's really hard to play against him in lane. In my opinion, and I hope this is how Riot view it as well, there should never be a champion that is banned all the time. Now Braum is banned all the time right now, much like Thresh was a while ago, because he's just so good in lane and so good in the mid game as well. Now his kit is kind of ideal for mid game. It's ideal for blocking engages like a Nami wave or something like that, and so toning down his lane phase is actually really good. So moving forward from the no champion should always be banned, we have Jax. Now these changes aren't big enough to remove him from the pick or ban group in my opinion, but they do actually hurt his early laning phase, so his levels probably 1 to 7 are a bit weaker than they were before. It basically just means that you actually need items to beat your opponent. Before you could kind of just outplay them with your E or your natural damage with your Q and your W, and that didn't really make sense for a hyper carry like Jax. These changes aren't huge, but they're probably bigger than you think they are, so you need to be way more careful when you go in lane. And honestly, I actually think going triple Doran's on this guy, so 2 Doran's blades and a Doran's shield, would kind of counteract these changes and leave him just as strong. So finally we have some Kayle nerfs, and honestly these probably aren't going to take her out of the meta, which is good, but they are going to bring her down a level. I'm not sure exactly how much damage they're taking away from her, but my friend Shakarez, or Kalebot, that I told you about last video, he actually did some numbers and he showed them to me, and it's about 100 less damage per auto attack. Now that 100 less is late game. Like if you look at the E, it's the ability power ratio that is getting nerfed, and that's going to affect her late game damage, not really her early game, because you don't really tend to build the AP. Now on the other side of this change though, with the intervention cooldown being increased, it actually makes her lane phase a lot weaker. Adding 20 seconds onto her cooldown doesn't seem like a lot, but if you think about how many times you've blown that ult and then gone back in for another fight and she has the ultimate ready, then you'll actually realise that it kind of is a big nerf to her lane phase. Okay, now these Maokai changes are pretty in-depth, and I'm not going to go through all of them kind of listing what they are, but I am going to tell you what I think of them. With these changes, I do think Maokai could be played in the jungle again, but I don't think he's going to be top tier because he just doesn't bring enough damage or utility to make up for the lack of damage. Now the reason that he could come back in is not because of these skill reworks or anything like that, it's because of the Quill Coat, the new item that builds into the spirit of the ancient golem, which I'll go over later. Now the combination of the new skills, which bring way more utility and kind of make up for the lack of damage a little bit, plus the extra health that you're going to get, means that you can build effectively and scale into late game really well. If you look at his kit, they've nerfed the damage on basically every ability, but what they have done is they've added more slows and kind of utility to it, making him much more relevant in the late game, especially with his ultimate that you can kind of hover around your AD or AP and absorb quite a lot of damage. Now I'm going to skip over this Nautilus change very quickly. It's basically just making it easier to see his passive, and they're also going to reduce the cooldown on it late game. This isn't really going to make too much of an impact, but it's the same deal with Maokai. The new item is really good on Nautilus, and with this kind of quality of life change, it means that he could quite possibly come back in, but again, he's not going to be top tier. Okay, so moving on to Nidalee. Now, there are quite a few changes, and I'm not going to go over them like with Maokai, but you can see them summarized on the right of your screen. Now the big changes I want to talk about here are just the Q and the passive basically. Now the missile width on the Q is getting buffed again, and with the hunt passive now, I don't think this really makes much sense. Let me go over the passive and then I'll explain what I mean. So Nidalee now receives 10% movement speed in all directions while hunting, which increases to 30% movement speed toward hunted targets. Now the reason this is so good, and the reason I think it synergizes with the Q change so much, is because you could in theory get chased or get ganked, throw a Q at your chaser, and then run away with the movement speed. Now I understand why Riot are buffing her. She had a very low win rate, but in my opinion it was because Nidalee is a very high skill cap champion. If you are good with Nidalee, it really shows and you can dominate your lane and a game. But if you're bad with her, then you really are going to have no impact at all. In my opinion, these changes weren't really needed, but they do help her along the way, and we'll probably start to see a couple of Nidalee bans against really good Nidalee players now. So Skarner, that little bug that is so irritating to play against as any kind of carry. Now honestly, his kit is infuriating to play against, and they've kind of toned down his damage a little bit, but I don't think this is really going to affect him much. Now the reason I don't think this will affect him is because they're nerfing his late game damage, but not by so much that it'll be noticeable, and the reason he's so strong right now is because of his ultimate and his passive stun. They haven't touched either of these things, and so I don't think really that's going to have much of an effect, and you'll still be seeing a lot of Skarner in your games. These next 4 champion changes don't really have much analysis going into them, so I'm not really going to cover them too in depth. What I will say is Vlad's change is not as big as people are making it out to be. When the patch notes got released, everyone was hyped about this Vlad buff, and yes, it does help that you can Ghost or Heal or Hourglass in your pool, but it doesn't really help him. The problems he has right now is that most bruisers will just build tanky, and because defense is so cheap, they can shut him down and he'll deal no damage. So that's kind of the problem he has, not that his W can use things in it. This is quite a nice quality of life change for Zac, and obviously it is geared towards the jungle Zac. And honestly, it's only really going to be good again because of the item change, not because of these changes. Now Yasuo and Ziggs have slight nerfs to them, but they're not really going to affect anything major, so I'm not really going to cover them too much. You'll still be seeing them in your games, and they'll still be interacting with you in pretty much the same ways. Now the final thing I want to go over is the Spirit of the Ancient Golem. So the biggest things here that have changed are the 25% bonus health, and also the new passives, and obviously the ward that this gives you now. So in theory, okay, just in theory, not in practice, tanky junglers could come back into the game now because they scale way better into the late game. Now what I actually mean by this is if you get a Spirit of the Ancient Golem and you get a Sunfire Cape and then possibly something like a Randuin's, you'll have a crap ton of health, and you'll also do quite a lot of damage with your base damages plus that Sunfire. Now this isn't going to work on everyone, but actually Sejuani is probably going to be a really good pick right now, and even people like Malphite could come back into the meta. The biggest problem they have is their clear speeds, and that's why they're not going to be top tier. At the end of the day, you can carry on every role. You can carry as a tank and you can carry as a support, but the problem is that if you aren't the one killing people, then in theory you have to rely on someone else. There is a reason that every top tier jungler right now has a crap ton of damage, and that's because they can kill everyone. They can pop into lane, 1v1 someone, and then kind of snowball the game themselves. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm sorry if it seems a little rushed. It's just that I wanted to focus mainly on the analysis side and not run through the actual changes themselves. In the future, I will be doing these way more prompt after the patch, so I will cover the changes as well and run through what has actually changed. But I figure after 3 or 4 days of the patch, then you're already going to kind of get to grips with the changes themselves, but just want that analysis side from me. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in my next video.